Graham Ashworth had not seen the sun set in 19 days. He knew this because his assistant, Naomi Lindquist, had started leaving a small paper tally on the corner of his desk each evening, a private joke that had stopped being funny around day 12. The tower on Bay Street held his office on the 41st floor, and from up there Toronto at midnight looked like a circuit board someone had left running after the shift ended. A scatter of gold windows, the red pulse of the CN Tower, the black ribbon of the lake beyond it all, swallowing the light. He rubbed his eyes until the numbers on his monitor blurred into a single gray smear. Northbridge Analytics had gone public 14 months ago, and every quarter since had felt like walking a wire a little higher off the ground. He had not slept more than 4 hours a night since February. He told himself this was temporary, the way he had told himself the same thing in October, and in July before that. His phone buzzed against the glass desktop. He didn't reach for it. He knew the pattern by now, an unknown number. A message engineered to sound casual, always arriving exactly when he was most exhausted, as though the sender could smell it from wherever they were. Buzz. Long day? Buzz, again, seconds later. You should eat something that isn't from a vending machine. Graham exhaled through his nose, something between a laugh and contempt, since his face had started showing up in business magazines. The boy from nowhere who'd built an algorithm that priced risk better than anyone on the street. His number had become a kind of trophy. Women who wanted to be photographed beside money, men who wanted an introduction to his board. All of them performing warmth like it was a skill they'd studied for. If it matters, they'll call, he said aloud. To no one the way he sometimes did in the empty office. This is just noise. He picked up the phone anyway, thumb hovering over the power button, ready to kill the screen and drop it in the drawer where it usually spent the night. Then the message came. You always forget to drink water on board nights. Your desk is probably a graveyard of empty coffee cups right now. Please, drink something that isn't caffeine, Graham. His hand went still. He looked down. 3 paper cups in a crooked row along the edge of the desk, exactly where they always ended up on nights like this. He hadn't told anyone that. He hadn't told anyone he even had board nights, a private shorthand only he used in his own head for the evenings before quarterly reviews when his stomach twisted itself into knots. Who is this? He typed, and deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again. He set the phone face down on the desk, the way you'd set down something that had gotten too hot to hold. And for the rest of the night he did not write a single line of code. The snow had been falling since 4 that afternoon, the wet, heavy kind that Toronto got in early March, when winter refused to admit it was over. Sienna Marlowe pedaled her bike through the slush on Front Street. With her scarf pulled up over her nose, the wheels of her cargo bag fishtailing every time she hit a patch of black ice under the streetlights. She'd taken the late grocery delivery shift because it paid better after 9, and because the diner where she worked mornings didn't pay enough on its own to cover her mother's medication, let alone rent. She'd been awake since 5 that morning. Her hands, inside 2 pairs of gloves, had gone past cold into something that just ached. The address on her phone brought her to the base of a glassed tower she recognized before she even looked up. The kind of building whose name you saw a lot of zeros. She checked the delivery slip twice. G. Ashworth, penthouse. Her stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She didn't go straight into the lobby. She wheeled her bike to the convenience store on the corner, instead, ducked under its buzzing awning, and spent the last $4 from her tips on a paper cup of hot ginger tea, the kind her mother used to make when Sienna was a kid. Back when the two of them lived a very different life than the one either of them had. Now, she pulled a small spiral notebook from her jacket, the pages already curling with damp, and wrote quickly, her handwriting jagged from the shivering. She left the tea and the note with the concierge, said nothing else, and pedaled back into the snow before anyone could ask her name. Upstairs, the private elevator chimed. Graham crossed the dark penthouse and picked up the bag from the outer table, expecting the cold sandwich he'd ordered 2 hours ago and forgotten about. Instead, warmth radiated against his palm through the paper. He frowned, reached in, found a sealed cup of tea to the sandwich, and a note taped to the lid, the ink already starting to bleed where the paper had gotten wet. The cold makes it too easy to get sick. Eat something warm before you go back to your screen. He stood very still in his own kitchen. The phrasing, the careful, slightly formal grammar, the crossed-out word near the bottom where the writer had started to say something and thought better of it. It matched not roughly, not approximately, but exactly, the cadence of the messages that had been arriving on his phone for the past week. He checked the delivery slip. Driver. S. Marlowe. Something in his chest, something he'd kept bolted shut for longer than he could remember, came loose by a single degree. He didn't call. He didn't have her number to call, not really, only the thread. He sat down at his kitchen counter, alone, and for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, typed something without calculating the angle first. Thank you. 2 words. He pressed send before he could take it back. 3 blocks away, under a bus shelter with her bike propped against the glass, Sienna felt her phone buzz in her coat pocket. She pulled it out with fingers that had gone numb past feeling. The screen lit her face in the dark. Steedsley people did in movies. She was too tired, too cold, too far past the age where 2 words from a stranger, who wasn't really a stranger, though he didn't know that yet, could undo a whole day. Instead, she just leaned her head back against the shelter's frozen plexiglass and let her eyes close. And for the length of one long breath, she didn't feel quite so alone in the city. By morning, Graham Ashworth was a different man entirely, or at least he wore a different man's face. In the 41st floor boardroom, he stood at the head of the table while 6 executives avoided eye contact with their own laptops. The Halloran account numbers are not acceptable, he said, and his voice carried the particular flatness that had, over the years, become more frightening to his staff than any amount of shouting. You have until Friday to fix the model. If you can't, I'll find someone who can. No one argued. No one ever did. When the doors closed behind the last of them, Graham allowed himself exactly one long breath before the mask came back off, the way it never did in front of anyone but himself. He walked to the window, phone already in his hand, some part of him checking before he'd even decided to check. You've been in a meeting for 2 hours. Please tell me you didn't just survive on black coffee again. A smile broke over his face before he could stop it, an actual smile, unguarded, the kind his own board members had probably never seen. If I don't drink coffee, the servers stop running themselves, he typed. I'm doing this for shareholder value. 40 floors below, in the lobby cafe that fed half the building its lunch, Sienna wiped down the espresso machine with her sleeve, pushed up past her elbow, apron dusted with flour from the morning rush. She felt the phone buzz against her hip and ducked behind the pastry case to read it, a short laugh escaping her before she could catch it. The idea of Toronto's most notoriously cold CEO making a joke about shareholder value to her felt almost impossible. Tell your servers to drink water too, she typed back, or they'll crash by noon like everyone else. She slid the phone back into her apron and looked up just as the private elevator chimed across the lobby. Graham stepped out, 2 assistants trailing a half step behind him, the whole lobby seeming to organize itself around the fact of his presence the way water bends around a stone. He paused halfway across the marble floor, pulled out his phone, and read something that made the corner of his mouth lift. Sienna froze behind the counter, a damp rag still in her hand. She had put that look on his face. She knew it, the way you know your own handwriting. And then, just as quickly, the knowledge curdled into something else. She looked down at her chapped hands, at the cheap black sneakers she'd had resoled twice, and then up again at the glass wall separating the cafe from the lobby, at the man on the other side of it who could buy the whole building if he wanted to. They were breathing the same recycled air. They were not, in any way that mattered, standing in the same world. She turned back to the counter and kept wiping. The afternoon rush turned the cafe into a wall of noise. The shriek of the steam wand, 40 overlapping conversations, the smell of burnt espresso grounds and wet wool coats. Sienna's shoulders ached from a double shift she hadn't planned on taking, but she kept the same practiced, polite smile, moving from customer to customer. The man in the gray overcoat slammed his hand on the counter hard enough to rattle the tip jar. This is wrong, he said, loud enough that conversations nearby actually stopped. I ordered oat milk. Do I need to say it slower for you? I'm very sorry, sir, Sienna said, already reaching for a fresh cup. I'll remake it right away. You people are all the same. His face had gone a mottled red. Before she could take the old cup away, he swiped his arm across the counter and sent the iced drink sailing into her chest, soaking through her apron and the shirt underneath in one cold shock. Ice cubes scattered and skittered across the tile. The whole cafe went quiet. He threw a bar rag onto the floor at her feet. Clean my shoes. You just ruined my leather with your garbage coffee. On your knees now. Sienna did not cry. She had learned a long time ago how to swallow things like this. She needed this job, needed the hours, needed the paycheck that kept her mother's medication filled, and so she knelt on the wet floor and reached for the rag with a hand that was shaking more than she wanted it to. As her fingers closed around the fabric, he stepped down hard on her hand with the heel of his shoe. She gasped. "Remove your foot." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the noise of the cafe the way cold water cuts through skin. The man in the overcoat spun around, already furious, already opening his mouth to shout back, and then his face did something Sienna had never seen a grown man's face do before. It simply emptied out. Graham Ashworth stood 3 feet away, still in his suit jacket, his expression giving away nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise a hand. He pulled out his phone, angled it toward the digital receipt still glowing on the man's table, and let the silence stretch just long enough to become unbearable. "That camera above the register records high-definition audio," Graham said, nodding once toward the black dome mounted on the ceiling. "My legal team costs more per year than you probably make. They have never lost a case they wanted to win." The man took a step back. "You have 2 options," Graham continued, in the same flat, unhurried tone he used in board meetings. "You apologize to her right now, or you can expect a summons for assault by tomorrow afternoon. Choose quickly. I have a call in 6 minutes." The man's face went from red to gray. He mumbled something that might have been an apology, grabbed his coat and left without looking back. Sienna pushed herself up off the wet floor, her uniform soaked through, her hand throbbing where his heel had come down. The air conditioning hit her wet shirt and she flinched. Graham stepped toward her, and for a moment, the armor he wore for the rest of the world simply wasn't there. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded white handkerchief, offering it without a word. Sienna looked at it, pressed cotton, monogrammed, worth more than she'd make in a week, and then up at him. He looked, in that moment, exactly like what he was. A man who owned the building she cleaned floors in. She, in her soaked apron and ruined shoes, felt something close in over her chest, tighter than embarrassment, something closer to shame. She stepped back, refusing the handkerchief. "I'm fine," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I need to go finish my shift somewhere else. Excuse me." She turned and walked quickly toward the staff room, leaving him standing alone in a cafe that had gone very quiet around him. 4 days passed without a single message between them. Sienna buried herself in work the way she always did when she didn't want to think. Kneading dough before the sun was up, scrubbing trays until her knuckles cracked, cycling deliveries until her legs stopped feeling like they belonged to her. Her phone stayed locked in her bag, screen dark. Across the city, in the back of a car gliding a Gardiner Expressway, Graham stared at a tablet full of quarterly projections without reading a single figure. For a man who had spent his entire adult life controlling every variable he touched, the silence from one unknown number had become unbearable in a way that made no logical sense to him, and that fact alone unsettled him more than the silence itself. He checked his phone every 10 minutes. He couldn't focus in his afternoon calls. He hadn't slept properly in days, though this time it wasn't the market keeping him up. Finally, his discipline cracked. He typed the message himself for the first time since this had started. "Did something happen? Why have you gone quiet?" He sent it and then sat with the phone in his hand, waiting, the city lights sliding past the tinted windows. Miles away, on a plastic chair in the back room of the cafe, at the end of a shift that had run 4 hours past when it should have. Sienna read the message twice. The memory of his pressed white handkerchief rose up next to the memory of her own soaked, stained uniform kneeling on the floor, and the gap between those 2 images felt, suddenly, like the whole problem in miniature. She typed slowly, "I don't want to be a bother. Someone like me isn't really worth your time. Thank you for what you did that day." She sent it, turned the screen off, and walked out into a cold that had nothing on the one settling into her chest. In the back of his car, Graham read her message 3 times. He had built a company worth more than most small countries. He had 2 weeks earlier threatened a stranger with a legal team that could end careers with a phone call. None of that, he understood now, staring at 11 honest words on a glowing screen, could fix the gap she was describing. He had no leverage here, no variable to adjust. He didn't reply. She didn't message again. The silence between them settled and thickened, and neither of them moved to break it. The call came at 3 a.m, 9 days later. Graham's phone lit the dark of his bedroom with a single sharp buzz. He was awake within a second. Some instinct in him had never fully learned how to sleep deeply, even now. "My mother needs you. Please, we need you right now." August hatched. St. Michael's Hospital emergency entrance. He didn't stop to think. He didn't calculate anything. He pulled on the nearest coat over the t-shirt he'd slept in and was out the door before the elevator had finished its first chime. The hospital hit him with fluorescent light and the sharp smell of antiseptic. He found her at the end of a corridor, sitting on a blue plastic chair, smaller than he'd ever seen her look, her eyes red, her hands shaking in her lap. When she saw him, she stood up too fast, opened her mouth, and nothing came out. And in that hallway, something in Graham that had been sealed for a very long time finally broke open. He didn't see a delivery cyclist. He didn't see a cafe worker in a stained apron. He saw a girl with wind-chapped cheeks pushing half a bowl of rice across a kitchen table toward him. Years and years ago, in a cramped rented house in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, back when he had absolutely nothing and nowhere else to go. He remembered it all at once, the way memory sometimes arrives, not gently, but like a wave. His own parents had lost everything when he was 16. The house, the business, all of it gone within a single terrible year. And in the scramble that followed, it was Sienna's mother, Ruth, who had taken him in without asking anything in return, feeding him at a table that already had too many mouths to fill. Sienna, younger than him by 2 years, had been the one who noticed he never ate enough, who slid her own portion toward him on the nights he studied too late to remember dinner. "You have to eat, Graham. You have to make it out of here and become something, so you never have to go hungry again." He had promised, back then, in 100 small ways, that he would come back for them, that he would repay every kindness twice over. Then the scholarship to Waterloo arrived. Then the internship in Toronto. Then the company, the money, the version of himself that Bay Street had built out of the boy from Dartmouth. And, somewhere in the climb, he had let the whole debt slide into a part of his memory he simply stopped visiting. He cut contact. He let 2 of the only people who had ever asked nothing of him disappear into a life he never checked on. "She had a brain hemorrhage," Sienna said now, her voice cracking down the middle. "I've tried everything. I don't have anywhere else to turn." She had spent the very last of her pride finding the man who had once left her family behind because there was no one else left to ask. Graham said nothing. He walked straight to the admissions desk, put down his card, and said one sentence in a voice that left no room for negotiation. "Get her the best surgical team in this hospital. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes." Now, the machinery of money moved instantly, the way it always did for him. Paperwork cleared, specialists were paged, and still, when Ruth was finally wheeled into the operating room, the 2 of them stood in the empty hallway with a decade of silence still sitting unresolved between them. "I'm the one who's been texting you," Sienna said finally, breaking it. "I saw your face in a magazine 2 years ago. I never stopped. I never stopped caring even after you disappeared." Graham's chest twisted in a way that had nothing to do with the hospital lighting. He wanted to close the distance between them. He wanted to say the thing he'd been carrying since Dartmouth, that he had never actually forgotten that small kitchen table, not once, not for a single year. But the instinct that had built Northbridge Analytics, the instinct that priced risk before it priced anything else, took over instead. Sienna saw the hesitation settle into his face and offered a small, tired smile that had more grief in it than any tears could have carried. "Look at us now," she said quietly. "You're standing at the top of a tower. I clean floors in the lobby of it. I'm only saying any of this so I can finally put it down." A pause. "There's too much distance between us now, Graham." His hands closed into fists at his sides. "You're right," he heard himself say, in a voice gone cold as the hallway tile. "We should keep this to what it was. Old friends. I'll cover everything for your mother. Consider it a debt finally paid." The words came out easily. Something underneath them did not survive saying them at all. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone under the fluorescent lights, both of them understanding, in that moment, that whatever had just broken might never fully mend. Morning light came in soft through the blinds of the hospital room 3 days later. Graham stood at the foot of the bed, holding a small basket of fruit he'd bought from the gift shop downstairs, his suit jacket draped over the chair, his collar open at the throat. Nothing like the man Bay Street knew. Ruth Marlowe opened her eyes slowly and looked at him for a long moment before a weak, genuine smile broke across her face. "Is that really you, Graham Ashworth?" she said, her voice thin but warm. "The skinny boy who used to fall asleep at my kitchen table with a textbook still open in front of him." Sienna, standing near the window, went red. "Mum, please." Graham laughed, an actual laugh, unfamiliar in his own throat. "You were right, Mrs. Marlowe. I was nothing but elbows back then. Thank you for feeding me when I had no one else. Standing in that small room, he felt something he hadn't let himself feel in years, an uncomplicated familial warmth that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings. A week later, he called Sienna into his office. He didn't slide a check across the desk. He slid a contract. Logistics and client relations, he said, all business. You have more patience and instinct for this than half the people I've hired with degrees. You'll need training. I'm not handing you anything easy. Sienna held the contract with both hands. I won't let you down, she said, and I'll pay back what you spent on my mother, every dollar of it, on my own. Just do the work, Graham said. That's the only repayment I want. The weeks that followed were relentless. There was no fairy tale treatment, and Sienna made sure of it herself. She arrived before the building was fully lit and left long after the cleaning crews had gone home, teaching herself shipping contracts and vendor disputes late into the night. From behind his glass office wall, Graham watched her rub her temples, straighten her spine and keep going, and something in him, quiet, unshowy, came to respect her more with every week that passed. One afternoon he passed her desk on the way to a meeting. She didn't shrink the way she once had. Afternoon, she said, steady, professional. The Kessler shipment report is in your inbox. There's an issue with the secondary vendor you'll want to look at before Thursday. He stopped, looked at her, properly, the way you look at someone you're seeing clearly for the first time. Good work, Sienna, he said, and meant it in a way that had nothing left over from pity. Whatever gap had once stood between the man in the glass office and the girl who'd once knelt on a wet cafe floor had, somewhere in these weeks, closed on its own. The restaurant sat on the top floor of an old stone building near King Street, the kind of place with no music playing except a pianist in the corner, and no decoration except the whole skyline, laid out beyond the windows, dusted faintly with the season's last snow. Sienna wore a simple navy dress. She carried herself with the quiet, hard-won confidence of someone who had just come through a probation no one had made easy for her. Congratulations, Graham said, lifting his glass. The board couldn't find one flaw in your report. Not one. She smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way it hadn't in months. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove it myself. The dinner moved with an ease neither of them had expected. When dessert arrived, Graham went quiet. He set his glass down carefully, reached into his jacket, and drew out something small and worn. The original note, blue ink faded, but the paper carefully laminated, protected against time in a way that told its own story before he said a word. He slid it across the table toward her. A long time ago, when I had nothing left in the world, your family gave me a place to be warm, he said, his voice lower than she'd heard it before. But I learned something since then that scared me more than being poor ever did. There's nothing emptier than having everything and feeling completely hollow inside it. He looked directly at her, and for the first time all the careful distance he kept from everyone was simply gone. A few months ago I was as close to breaking as I've ever come, he said. Your messages, clumsy and honest and completely unasked, were the only thing that kept pulling me back. I'm not the one who saved you, Sienna. You saved me. I'd like it very much if you'd stop pushing me away. Sienna looked down at the note, worn soft at its edges from years of being carried, undeniable proof that he had never once let go of it, even when he'd let go of everything else. Warmth moved through her chest, burning through what was left of the old shame, the old gap between them. She didn't say anything. She reached across the white tablecloth and took his hand in hers, steady this time. And outside the window the whole city kept glittering on the way it always did, indifferent to the two of them. Except that for once neither of them needed it to notice. It wasn't a rescue. It never had been. It was two people who had once shared a small kitchen table, finally finding their way back to each other, older, harder won, and entirely real.